our session today. Ron and I are going to start the session, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Universal Protocol template. And then we're going to kick it over to Michelle, who will wrap things up with the Cusp protocol or program and their activities. Very briefly, my name is Bill Greer. I currently serve as the Assistant Vice President at the University of Michigan, and I oversee the animal care and use, biosafety, and various other compliance programs. I've been involved in animal care and use for over 30 years. The plan is for me to do a first couple of slides, and then I'll turn it to Ron, and at that time Ron will give an intro for himself, and then Ron will take us through the rest of the slides. So let's see. So some of our goals. So Ron and I chose not to go into the details of how the where we are as far as what the template looks like. We're going to give you a brief background on how we got to where we are and some of the history. But if you have any questions, please let us know. Our discussion points today will be to let you know how we determined that a UPT would be needed, the Universal Protocol template, some of our goals behind the development of that, and then how we got in the community input. In other words, IACUC administrative community. And then talk a little bit about how FDP became involved with our process or with the idea of developing this. We'll give you a status update, what we've done, where we are, and when we plan to finalize things. And then we'll have a little Q&A. So if you have any questions along the way, you can certainly ask them, but we certainly will give you time for questions too at the end. So Ron, I'll turn it over to you for intro, and you can take it from here.
Okay, Bill, thanks much. Welcome, colleagues, friends around the country, maybe even around the globe. Hopefully you've either got your COVID vaccine or you've registered to receive yours, and I'm bringing it in only because putting this protocol template together, I have got the opinion and somewhat Michael logistics of getting our vaccinations to everyone who needs them. This has been a long process, very long indeed, and it still has quite a ways yet to go. We started the process approximately 8 years ago, actually a little longer than that. It came up at several of the best practice meetings across the country. Again, IACUC administrators who were frustrated because things that were required at one institution were maybe not being asked at another institution. And it appeared actually that many administrators were kind of doing things because we had always done it that way before. There wasn't any good reason or reasoning behind the questions being presented to the IACUC, and many committees had sort of gotten a bit more broad in their addressing issues at the institution than what had been originally intended in regulatory or policy position. In 2016, the IACUC Administrators Association formalized a project to see if we couldn't sort of distill down the important questions that were truly within the IACUC's purview, and recognizing that since we had begun the process, there had been sort of a cottage industry develop of professional IACUC administrators who were now qualified, trained, and very expert at doing what it was that they needed to do, in addition to other individuals at our institutions who are focusing on training activities, on safety activities, and other kinds of things. So historically, when the IACUC had, if you will, the entire bailiwick at an institution, we now had additional partners which could help us properly oversee good welfare for animal subjects, good research procedure, and validated research outcomes. So it began then trying to formalize a project and see if we couldn't somehow come down to a common document, which might be usable in a variety of locations. We decided that having a larger partnership would also be of value. The IACUC administrators are the administrative folks, but often those are not the real decision makers at the institution. They are the servers and servants at the institution. And so we did approach others, to include FDP, to consider establishing this as a larger group project, with the ultimate goal of having a product that all of us could identify with and utilize at our home institutions, wherever that home institution might be. Next slide, Bill. I guess we've got a little bit of delay in the slide, so forgive me then for that just a moment. What were the objectives of this particular project? It was to see if you couldn't create a document that used both an academia industry at VA institutions within the community and anybody else it might be. It was founded in some regard upon a small little book that Bill and I worked on several years ago. It was an assimilation of meeting minutes over about a 10-year period. From that, then, we started putting together, if you will, a comparison document to which was already available on the OLAW website, and seeing if there were similarities or synergies could be developed by looking at what had historically been proposed, was actually being used in the NIH community, and where we currently were as a larger community. It did go to FDP, and gratefully we did get an FDP working group to help us work through this process. Next slide, Bill. And so that process has been going on for quite some time. It became clear early on, back up one if we could, please. It became clear early on that any project such as this, when applied against a variety of species and multiplicity of institutions, was going to be somewhat overwhelming. And so trying then to focus something most useful, we thought it might be best to consider the species most in use, and that being mice and rats. As often the questions applied to these particular rodent research subjects are rather similar and have similar outcomes, not to suggest speciesism or a lesser state of welfare, but nonetheless some consistency and applicability of what is applied to both mice and also rats. The objective of the universal template was to try to gather the information that the IACUC would need to make an informed review and separate as much of that information out which was necessary at the institutional level, but not really required for the IACUC to do its job with animal welfare and animal oversight. Thirdly, we thought an objective would be appropriate to try to make it as PI friendly as possible. I think many of our institutions, at least the message that came through in best practice meetings, were that many institutions were having a guessing game with researchers, researchers wanting to fill in a box in one particular area or in one manner, and the IACUC not understanding what was being suggested or applied in that case. So where we could, make it as simple as we possibly could. The ultimate goal was that the Universal Protocol template would never be mandated from any federal or a major oversight regulatory or policy agency, but it would be available. The colleagues at the OLAW did opt and have indicated that they will make it available through their website, which is already a resource for all animal user institutions across the country. In addition, the partners at the USDA noted, again, no requirement for the UPT, but certainly for institutions, particularly more diminutive or junior or newcomer institutions, it might be a really good place to start, and from which they could build a protocol that would meet their needs, satisfy the IACUC requirements, achieve all regulatory statutory issues, and achieve the desirable outcome. It was based on the OLAW form, which I noted a few months ago was already in use by intramural investigators at the NIH. And there is a link here on the bottom if you're so inclined to go take a look at that and see what it actually looks about. It was then supplemented by administrators at a variety of institutions all across the country, tailored specifically for the species that are most commonly used, focused on things that are needed for the IACUC to make it an informed document, maximizing the use of check boxes, and most of all, keeping it very, very user friendly. We're having some challenges, I think, with the slides today. Doing things long distance are a bit of a challenge sometimes. There we go. We'll continue then looking at what was the action plan for the project. First of all, to develop a document that is consistent with both regulation and policy to assure that we are meeting the minimums required for proper oversight, for effective use and humane consideration of all animals used in research. Secondly, to consider the question's primacy. In other words, was the question on the form necessary, or it should be necessary, to robustly review whatever the proposed activities ought to be? Some of our questions on some of the forms that we've reviewed over the last year or so seem to be rather peripheral, may be important to a subunit at an institution, but not necessary really for the IACUC's consideration of the animals and the use of the live animal activities. Is the information related to compliance, but maybe not necessarily animal activities? And do we have another partner at the institution who can properly track the compliance aspect of it? Or is the information managed by another agency at the institution, which is a partner for the IACUC, but not necessarily required in an actual protocol document? One example of this might be such things as the basis for aseptic procedures in mice and rats. Those, for the vast majority of us, are either policies or codified SOPs at the institution. They are our baseline statutes for working with animals in that context, and probably aren't really required in the protocol since it's an institutional foundation and something we would expect all institutions to do. Next slide, please. The second page of the action plan was to consider the wording of the question. I know I am here in Oklahoma. Bill said I would introduce myself, which I fancifully forgot to do, but I am currently at the University of Oklahoma here in Oklahoma, and there are some things that people say in middle US that may not have the same intention of word usage in another part of the country. So we don't want to get too complicated. Our researchers are exceedingly intelligent people. Sometimes they use really big words when a really simpler word might be more effective. So keep it simple. The question, let's just straightforwardly say what we're asking. Let's try to eliminate the guessing games. We're not trying to play a game of gotcha. We're trying to set the basis on which animal research can be conducted. It should be clearly written, and not written from an administrator's perspective or a compliance perspective, but from the PI's perspective. So an important part of the beta process of the UPT is going to be having researchers review it and even respond back. What does this question mean to you? To confirm the question as is written is understandable and also respondable from a PI's perspective. And then, is the information truly needed by the IACUC to make a review of the proposed activities for the IACUC to oversee and do its required job of assuring animal welfare in a regulatory environment? Fourth part of our action plan was, did we format this logically? I don't know about the protocol at your institution, but at many I have seen, we have administrative information found in a procedural section. We have live animal procedures found in places where we're trying to justify animal numbers or other kinds of things. So is there a way to logically gather the information into sections that make sense? That also will help at the local level as the protocol is managed by administrative staff. Administrative information can be captured by the IACUC support staff. Facility housing information or animal numbers information can be captured very easily by the veterinary staff or the husbandry staff or the animal facility staff, and other sorts of things as well. Hazard materials being easily captured by the safety staff. So if it's simple, if it's straightforward, and if it's properly formatted, logically formatted, then people can do a much better job of overseeing the sections necessary for them. The fifth component were questions of reviews. So when we have our reviews from whichever or many regulatory oversight agencies visit your institution, can they see what has been proposed, how the IACUC has reviewed it, how it has been accomplished or engaged, and then how has it been monitored? Lastly, the goal, number 6 on this was the goal for documenting user testing, in other words, training aspects. Have the researchers completed the necessary training for the things that they're proposing to do? Can we capture veterinary training? Have the IACUC administrators received the sort of oversight necessary to assure the right kind of checks have been performed and the right kind of oversight measures have been accomplished? Is there a way in which we can validate the document from the very beginning through the very end to assure all members, all participants can view the important parts, protect the animal's well-being, assure qualified research in a compliant environment, and it's all done very properly? We'll move on then to the next page. And the question now is what progress has been made? Well, at this point, a draft template has been developed through the IACUC Administrators Association. It has been viewed and reviewed several times. It has been presented to the subcommittee of FDP. It has been divided into various sections, and that subcommittee has reviewed and commented on the various sections of the document. We have collated those comments into a common document, and they have been shared once again back with the FDP subcommittee. There are many discussion groups that have been established, and the discussions continue to go forward on exactly what type of questions are most necessary, needed, clear and simple, and addressable in various sorts of context. We've had Zoom meetings to discuss the document as well. There is a working draft of the Universal Protocol template, and it's now being looked at, analyzed, discussed as we move toward a finalized document. So when it is finalized, we do need to go through a series of testing. And since a lot of the focus of this is clarity from the perspective of the researcher, we do need to have assessments from researchers on, does the document ask the questions in a way which they are interpretable, and does it achieve the answers that the IACUC is looking for in which to make an informed and robust decision. It also will need to be reviewed by veterinarians to assure those components of animal welfare that are unique to the veterinary community have also been addressed. And it needs to be considered by IACUC members as well as IACUC administrators. When it is finally completed, though, it will be available to the entire research community. The timeline from now until completion, well, this is one time we would like to get this project completed within this one calendar year. We are continuing with the working groups, and the goal is by April of this year to finalize the Universal Protocol template so that it can be user tested during late spring and over the summer, with a goal then of having a finished and tested product in the fall period time. October of 21 is the target we're using, and pulling it to completion by the end of this calendar year, so by December of 2021. That way, in January of 2022, if our colleagues at OLAW are ready for publication on their website, it will be available for folks to consider, to utilize parts, pieces, or all of it to try to simplify their oversight of animal use at their home institutions. Next slide, please. There completes our overview of the timeline and sort of the structural components to get us through the Universal Protocol templates. I know many on the call today have participated by answering questions and providing additional input. Those doors are always open. If you need to or would like to give us additional guidance, you're more than welcome to do that, and we encourage it. This is, after all, a group project for the benefit of the entire community, and not the product of any particular small group or subgroup of individuals. Back to you, Bill.
Thanks, Ron. Just a few thoughts and questions for you guys as a team before we move on to Michelle. So Michelle's going to talk about Cusp, and we've teamed up so that we can relate these programs. And the idea is that we'll be able to use some components of Cusp in the template. But very quickly, before she starts her presentation, Ron mentioned that we're going to need some we're going to do some user testing and need some individuals to do that. So if you're of attendance and you're not part of our current working group, if you'd be interested in doing some user testing for us, send either myself or Ron an email. I think you can find us very easily. Just go to the University of Michigan or the Oklahoma websites. If you don't have our emails, that it's there. We'll get you an email, or maybe we can do it through FDP. But we're going to let Michelle go, and then if we have any questions in general, we can field them at the end. Again, our presentations are both brief because we're giving you updates, so we'll leave some time for questions. And if we need to end early, we will, based on what you guys want to talk about and information that you would like to have. So Michelle, I'll kick it to you.
Great, thanks, Bill and Ron. They're getting the slides up right now.
Edgar, is this the end of the deck? I think you might need to go to the beginning. Or move on to the next deck.
Great. This is an update on the Cusp project. I'm Michelle Broad. I'm a scientific reviewer at the University of Washington. I'm speaking on behalf of the larger group today. Hang on a second. And working on advancing the slides here. Do I have control over the slides? Ah.
There you go.
Great, thanks. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Cusp stands for Compliance Unit Standard Procedure. And the idea is that it's an ongoing project. It's been going for 2.5 years now, and it strives to provide an online database for participating institutions that would like to exchange, share standard procedures that are used in animal care protocols. We are really hoping that besides gaining information from this site, participants will also contribute standard procedures that are used at their institution or are being developed. And I'll just mention before I go on that it's very similar to the universal template in the sense that these procedures are not already approved for your use. They are templates that you can use to write standard procedures that are then go on to be approved at your institution through the normal process. The timeline of how this project has been going is there was originally a working group formed back in March of 2017. And the project was approved by FDP half a year later. And ever since then, various aspects of the project have been proceeding along. And at this point, we're in the first phase of testing, which is called the alpha testing phase, where we're identifying major bugs, usability issues, feature gaps, that process is largely performed by a tech team, but the actual testing is being done individually by 2 to 3 institutions, and the testers you can see on the right there, and the development team is mostly David Wright at FDP, as well as an additional resource that FDP has procured. And we really want to thank FDP for their support in helping move this project along. So the next slide shows the various steps that we're going to be moving through. I just mentioned the alpha stage. We're really on the edge of starting into the beta phase, which you can see there is designated to be in Q1 of this year. So we're hoping to move into that shortly. In that phase, we're going to be developing some of the business processes associated with the project. So that would include the single sign-on features, how to download some of the procedures, and then eventually we'll work on how to upload them. And just generally identifying bugs and technical issues that can occur with a new system. And the testing of that will be expanded to 6 to 8 different institutions. And those have been identified. I'll mention them again later. Then we'll move into the pilot phase, hopefully by spring, summer this year. And that'll be the last phase before the final release. And it'll actually be what we hope is this final system, so it can be practiced as if it were real. And it will give us information about how user-friendly the system is. How are people using it? Is accessing it difficult? Are any security issues coming up? And that pilot phase will be expanded again to 15 to 20 institutions. So within our larger working group, we're hoping to get a lot of institutions participating. with the idea that any issues that might come up will be represented. Just so you know, this is designed to function with a variety of different types of input. So if you have, for example, an electronic database system already in use, hopefully you'll be able to download that information directly into the Cusp database. And if you don't, you can manually type it in. And so we're hoping to be able to accommodate a variety of different kinds of current systems, which is a bit of a challenge, but that's where these various testing phases are going to be useful. Eventually, hopefully along the same lines as the Universal Protocol template timing, we're hoping to go live and actually make this a reality for anyone who wants to, anyone from FDP at this point who wants to access the information. And that we're hoping to do by the end of this year, if not sooner. As I said, the initial release will be limited to just the FDP members, which is about 200 institutions. So that'll be a great way of testing it out and getting feedback. And then the site will eventually be opened to the larger research community. So that is where things are right now and where they're going. So as far as the beta testing phase, which I had mentioned is just, we're really on the verge of moving into that. We already have testers from, as you can see on the left, quite a variety of institutions across the country. And those have been identified. The training of those testers has been completed. So right now, there's a revised testing plan underway, and we're going to be updating what test cases to work on. And then additional feedback will be collected to help with implementation. The idea being that as issues come up, we can include those in the FAQs that will eventually be on the Cusp site, so that if folks are trying to use it and encountering any issues, we'll hopefully have already vetted those issues and can give you some idea of how to move forward. As far as other progress, in those boxes, you can see the 4 subcommittees that have been active in moving the Cusp project forward. Education and outreach, I'm a co-chair of that with Scott Burry. The help desk, which is the one that's involved in the FAQs and is designing a survey to try to find out what the issues are or may be. Quality control, Eva and Cindy Rosenblatt are involved in making sure everything is going to be consistent, and the technical systems, and we're moving from Jarrett to a new tech person to be involved in that. We're trying to present at national and local meetings. At the most recent Aalas meeting, a panel and demo video was presented at a session called On the Cusp, a new option for addressing administrative burden. Some of you may have attended that. My group, Education and Outreach, is trying to identify not just national meetings, which we all probably know about, but some of the local meetings. Maybe in your area, you have local meetings you attend that where folks may not be familiar with this project. So we'd love to have information about any such meetings that you attend or would like to have this disseminated there. And we're happy to give presentations or provide information. We're trying to develop a brochure that can be handed out when we have in-person meetings again, so that folks can have that available to kind of remind them of the project. And we already have an active email address for the help desk. So as things progress, folks can just email directly to the help desk if they encounter any issues. And we're drafting this help page content for new users, as I had mentioned. One of the things folks will be able to do, which is really nice, is to be able to input sort of a term. It can be a generic term or it can be a pretty specific term. into a data dictionary or into a keyword search, and they can find out what procedures exist that contain those terms. So I think it's going to be pretty sophisticated and useful in that regard. Additional other progress is the check marks indicate that these have been completed. So the business process and supporting materials that are just about to be tested with the beta testing include onboarding new institutions and reviewing flag procedures. And a procedure might get flagged if it seems to be perhaps outdated or there's some kind of new regulations that would require us to review it and talk to the person who had put it in and see if there's a better way to address the issue or replace the procedure perhaps. We're developing business processes for inactivating institutions. If an institution leaves FDP or for any other reason wants to withdraw from this project, we need to have a way of doing that. And that's an example of a business process that's being worked on for the beta testing stage. Updating the Cusp page on the FDP website so that folks can go to the exactly to our Cusp page and get information about this project and figure out how they can use it. And getting this high-level FAQ created with specific information about how to navigate the system. And as I had mentioned earlier, the help desk group is working on creating user survey questions so we can learn more about the researchers and institutions that are using this the database and figure out, get input from them and feedback about how user friendly they feel it is. So that'll be useful information going forward to help make the project even more successful. And that is it for us. Happy to take questions, like Bill said.
As a reminder, to ask questions, you can either do so in the chat box, or if you'd like, you can raise your hand in the participants list and we'd be happy to call on you. Give it a few minutes. Oh, here's one. Can you give us a sense of the diversity of the IACUC platforms and use at the testing institutions? They are likely to influence the use, experience, and potentially the solutions identified.
Is that for the Cusp project or both? Either. Cusp. Okay, sure. Thanks, Mark, for your question. We have incorporated institutions, as I mentioned, that have electronic databases currently, as well as those who don't. We also have smaller institutions, including emerging research institutions participating. So they may not have quite the same resources as you kind of indicated. And we welcome to have more, we're really welcoming more. So it would be great to have more diversity, but we're definitely diverse in terms of geography and sort of the demographics of the research institutions. Some are really large research institutions, some are more medium-sized. And as I said, we have a few small emerging research institutions.
Okay, great. So we have a couple other questions here. Regarding UPT, lots of protocols are getting FOIA, animal rights groups. Is the template being reviewed with an eye to minimizing as much as possible information that could be used against researchers by these groups?
We are, and Ron, you can add to this as well, but one of the things that we're trying to do is focus on the minimum required for the IACUC to do its job. I mean, anyone that's been on an IACUC or been involved in this a long time, there's a lot of minutia that goes into a protocol right now that really isn't necessary for the IACUC to do its job. So when we kicked this project off, one of the things that we were focusing on was reducing regulatory burden in a sense that, let's ask PIs to only give the information IACUCs need to conduct a thorough review, and also, to be able to ensure a veterinarian's going to receive the animals as they're engaged in the research. So I think, to your point, if the template were to be used by an institution, it would include the minimum information necessary for the IACUC to do its job. Consequently, the minimum information that could be acquired through FOIA. I think that's the best we can do. I know that we've talked about this as a community many times, but we do our best. What do you think, Ron? What would you add to that?
Well, I would add only that FOIA is something that concerns all of us, and very frequently the things that are FOIA'd are things that are not required by regulation or policy. So if we can return to a simpler time in terms of achieving all the regulatory requirements, do so effectively, that information ought to be available as a general sense anyway. It is the public who tends to fund the majority of research, but it ought to be written in such a way that it is not in and of itself inflammatory. It ought to be written in a way in which it is explanatory, and information that is not necessary that falls into the IACUC should be protected from going off campus. So long answer to buttress Bill's statement, but also to say yes, simplicity will often keep you from embarrassing situations.
So we have another question. How many institutions share protocol content and FOIA requests? You say it's probably state specific.
It is. So every state has its own sunshine laws. And under a sunshine law, for example, University of Michigan sunshine laws means pretty much anything that has to do with animal research is available to the public upon request. So remember, it's important to remember that FOIA is the federal requirement. So that means if somebody wants to request your protocol, if it's not federally funded, unless you have a sunshine law to say otherwise, then it probably isn't required for you to provide it. So, simply stated, if it's NIH funded and they say, I want to see Bill's protocol, then, it's required. There's a lot of minutia. We could get into a conversation, but technically, if they ask it of me and I'm not a federal agency, but yet it's federally funded, I could say, well, you'd have to get it from OLA, but I wouldn't give them all that information. So, your point about sunshine laws, those are probably the ones that are most relevant to you and your states, because they're the ones that make it very easy for anybody requesting information to get protocols or relevant details about your animal care and use program.
I would add as well that I've seen so many documents where researchers want to give the animal care committee everything and including the kitchen sink. Yet 90% of that is not really required or necessary, but once it's written in a document and it's published as a document, it is part of the document. And sometimes those things are far more embarrassing than necessary. They give out much more information than is required. And again, to echo Bill's statements, sunshine laws vary state by state. Some places it's easy to get far more than they would be dutifully able to get if we did a much better job of scriptively writing our requests for animal use, which is one of the reasons for, you heard me say, stop guessing games. The questions the IACUC needs to know and wants to know are really a specific set of questions. They're mandated by regulation and or policy. There are perfect reasons for it. So let's ask those questions. Let's ask them in a way that is informative, but let's not go into excruciating detail into minutia where we can get ourselves hung.
Agreed. To Dr. Brown's point, she mentions in the chat that OLAW does not have access to IACUC approved protocols. And again, we could have a huge conversation about FOIA, But those that are requesting documents under FOIA, they need to know what to ask for, and they need to be very specific. So Ron and I have done sessions at best practice meetings on FOIA and sunshine laws to help our community have conversations and understand some of the nuances. But back to the question and to Mark's last comment in the chat, the simplicity will go a long way. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's Ron's point. If the only thing that's there is what's required, if everybody's doing blood collection in mice the same way, if they FOIA blood collection from my institution, yours and Ron's, it's going to look the same no matter what. So there's nothing that, an activist group could exploit, which is what we often see.
Okay, great. I think we have one last question. Can the 2020 Cusp presentation given at AALAS be made available to participants?
Yeah, I saw that question. I don't know. I think it's already on our Cusp website. So I'm just not 100% sure if everyone can access that, but I think so. We'll try to make sure that it is available through the Cusp page on the FDP website.
Okay, great. I'm not seeing any other questions. Is any final calls?
No, just a final comment, Lily. If anybody's interested in doing some user testing for the protocol template, as I mentioned, let Ron or I know. We'd be happy to put you on the list. We have a few already, but we can always use more. We want to get diverse opinions, i.e. from, big institutions, small institutions, nonprofits, all of the different types of organizations, pharmaceutical. This applies not just to academia, but to many. So we're really interested to see how this document will work for all types of organizations. So give us a holler if you're willing to help us, if you're willing to provide some input.